10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 341. Hey everybody, welcome into episode 341 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. Welcome back. This is part 4 of our series on blues with the masters, and this week we are going to look at one of the greatest solos of all time, in my opinion, and one of the most well-known blues solos, John Coltrane's playing on Blue Train. But before we dive into that, just want to remind you this is a listener-supported show, and that means we rely on people just like you to keep the podcast coming out each and every week in high quality in the form of a small monthly donation. And we do that on the Patreon platform. So to get more information and to get yourself signed up today, you do get PDFs and audio examples with every single episode. Go to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners and get yourself signed up for instant access. Thank you to our new patrons this week. Thank you to our new $5 patrons, David, Albert, and Richard. And thank you to our new $3 patron, Nathan. We really appreciate it. And for everybody over there that's been supporting us for a long time, thank you. We cannot do this show without you, and we really, really appreciate it. So again, that's 10minutejazzlesson.com. Click on one of the Patreon banners. Get yourself signed up today. Okay, so Coltrane. You know, he occupies such a lofty space in jazz history that sometimes it can be really intimidating to even approach his playing, to even try to figure out a little bit of what's going on. And that, I think, is also true with this solo. I remember way back when I learned this solo, it took me months and months and months because it is just so technically challenging. But there are some things, even if you're not going to go out and play this solo tomorrow because it is too challenging, there are some things that we can glean from his playing on this record that I think we can really carry forward in our own playing. Now, first of all, I think we should talk a little bit about this record, which goes by the same name, Blue Train, its place in history, both of jazz and in the history of Coltrane's music. So this record was recorded in 1958, and this was during a time period in Coltrane's life where he was playing a residency with Thelonious Monk at the 5 Spot in New York. And I think this was a really pivotal time in Coltrane's history where, you know, he has said that playing with Monk was a huge turning point for him, just like a lot of people that were hired on as Monk's saxophone player. You know, Monk had a special spot in his heart for the tenor saxophone, and the list of tenor saxophone players that played with Monk is like a who's who of the greatest players in history, and Coltrane was on that list. Now, if you haven't checked out the Live at the 5 Spot recording with Coltrane and Monk, I highly suggest it. It's a little bit rough to listen to in terms of recording quality, but for me personally, that is some of my favorite Coltrane ever put on record. Now, let's think about 1958. What would Coltrane do next year that would literally change the face of jazz? He would come out with Giant Steps. So I think it's safe to say that Coltrane was probably already sort of discovering that Giant Steps chord progression and starting to shed over it and starting to come up with some of his signature sound. Now, it's also crazy to think about where this was in Coltrane's history, just in terms of all the different periods that Coltrane went through. Now, this is not Coltrane's first recording as a leader, and Coltrane was already a pretty well-known saxophonist because of his work with Miles Davis, you know, years earlier. But this record, in my opinion, really stands out from a lot of the things that Coltrane did before this. And it really, really made a statement. You know, Coltrane was here for real. He was not messing around. This was going to be a generational voice on the tenor saxophone. And again, that time period of like, he had just worked with Miles and he would go on to record Giant Steps the year after this. This is a really, really cool time period in Coltrane's playing, Coltrane's life, and Coltrane's work as a leader, and ultimately a musician who would go down as one of the greatest to ever touch the saxophone or to ever play jazz. So with that historical context, let's check out the first two choruses is what I've chosen to focus on for this episode, because I think they contain a lot of really cool material that we can talk about. Now, I did take a couple of BPM off of the final tempo because I figured it would be more approachable for all of you that actually want to try to play the transcription. I also did it for myself because it's really hard to play at the full tempo. So this is about at 130 BPM, whereas the original recording, it hovers between like 140 and 150 BPM. So I figure if you could play it at this tempo with me first, then you can go on and try playing it with the record. Now, the other thing that I haven't done in this transcription is I haven't put a lot of like the grace notes and things that Coltrane is doing that add to this. What I want you to do is work for that a little bit. So you have like 99% of the solo, but you'll hear Trane do a couple of things that aren't written on the page. And once you get comfortable with this insane flurry of notes that is the first two choruses, maybe you can go back and try to add some of those things in using your ears and figure them out yourself. All right, so here is me playing the first two choruses. I know it doesn't hold a candle to Trane, but this is my attempt at it. Just amazing. One of the finest statements that I've ever heard on any recording anywhere. So let's talk about a couple of things. The first thing I want to talk about is how Coltrane has this like ridiculously awesome mix of playing very blues oriented material, stuff that's a little bit more simple and a little bit more drawing off of, like, for instance, the minor pentatonic. And we see that a lot at the beginning of his solo in the first 8 measures. He's playing a lot of triplet material and he's playing a lot of that minor third. And if you really look at the way that it's laid out, you'll notice that it's all almost exclusively minor pentatonic based, with the one exception being the second of that scale in the key of concert E flat. So we hear him playing this really, really soulful stuff. And then what does he do in measure 10? He goes off and he starts playing these really, really intricate double time lines that fit so well into the overall energy of the solo. Really soulful, swinging, triplet bass, then all of a sudden, boom, he hits you with that really sort of athletic sound of that double time, making it clear like he can play basically whatever he wants. And I've talked about this on YouTube videos and previous podcasts, that mix of spacious, swinging, blues bass playing combined with the double time, bebop-ish kind of stuff. It's such a classic way to approach something. And Trane is doing it on full display here. So now what we notice in the second chorus, so starting in measure 13, is he actually starts with a bunch of crazy double time stuff. It might actually be the most complicated part of these two choruses. But then what's really, really interesting is around the 5th bar of the second chorus, he briefly, very, very briefly goes back into that triplet-based minor pentatonic material. And then what he does after the 5th bar of the second chorus is he leaves a little bit of space. And then guess what? He jumps back into a bunch of double time material. So it's really cool if you look at this on a little bit of a zoomed out level. Think about what he's doing with his phrasing as far as single time versus double time, rhythmic scheme, so eighth note triplets versus 16th notes. Really think about the way that he's putting together these statements and realize that that's a huge part of why it is so effective and makes you want to keep listening to more and more and more and more. Now, there's a couple of other things that I want to talk about. One of them is his time feel. He's so confident in where he's putting the notes that you will notice in certain parts of this as you're reading through the transcription, you will notice that he delays or rushes certain parts of this that are kind of impossible to notate. And what this makes me realize as a jazz musician who's trying to always get better is that you can't even think about rushing or laying back super far like he's doing, almost so that the rhythm is not true, if that makes sense. You can't do that unless you have the most rock solid understanding of time and the ability to play your instrument with super, super solid time. And then once you can do that, you can start to actually consider stepping outside of that and delaying or rushing through things to create certain effects. And Coltrane does this all the time. That's what makes him so hard to transcribe, both on the instrument and to write things down on paper, is because he's doing all these little in-between things that feel impossible for us mere mortal jazz musicians, but yet he pulls it off in such a seamless and soulful and complete way. That's something else that you're going to notice when you're attempting to play this. Oh, okay, in that measure, this thing that's written down on the page is not necessarily what he's playing, but it's the closest we can come to actually writing it down on paper. So I want you to pay attention to that too, because it sort of opens you up to a world of things that you can consider once you really get your time down. So enjoy this transcription, enjoy the joy of playing along with Coltrane and diving into his music. It really is something that will open your eyes to a true genius and a true virtuoso musician. The music of Trane just runs so deep, and that's why his legacy is what it is. So let me know if you have any questions. Again, you can grab the transcription that I've prepared for you in concert, B-flat, E-flat, and bass clef by choosing to support this podcast with a small monthly donation. So go to 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, and get yourself signed up today. We'll see everybody next week with another brand new episode. Hope everybody has awesome holidays, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye, everyone.